First of all, I wish to thank Professor Lubna Al Arab and all my colleagues at the Clinical Oncology Department at Chance University for their kind invitation. This is a symposium sponsored by the Hikma company. And I think, especially in those days, we have to support our regional and national pharmaceutical industries. Just remind you about the magnitude of the problem. Breast cancer is considered as the most commonly diagnosed cancer worldwide, accounting for 11.7% of cancer in the world, with 6.9% breast cancer mortality. What about the situation here in Egypt? Breast cancer is the most common malignancy and the most common cause of cancer-related mortality in women, accounting for 32.4% of cancer in this population, with about 10.3% breast cancer mortality. Hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative is the most common breast cancer subtype, with a 94.8% 5-year relative survival. Despite the enhanced therapeutic strategy, about 20% of breast cancer patients recurred during the course of the disease. And once distant recurrence has occurred, the disease remained largely incurable, with the median survival ranging between 2 to 3 years. Targeting estrogen receptor signaling pathway is the cornerstone for the treatment of patients with hormone receptor positive breast cancer. This is mainly by aromatase inhibitors, selective estrogen receptor modulators, and selective estrogen receptor downregulator. One of the main challenges facing the management of patients with hormone receptor positive breast cancer is the development of hormonal resistance. 15 to 20% of tumors has an intrinsic resistance to treatment, and about 30 to 40% has acquired resistance. And accordingly, only 30% of the patients with metastatic breast cancer have an objective regression of tumors with the initial endocrine therapy, and only 20% of the patients with metastatic breast cancer have a prolonged stable disease with initial endocrine treatment. It is assumed that by targeting both estrogen receptor signaling as well as CD46 pathways in combination might delay or prevent the resistance by delaying or preventing the escape phenomena or the escape pathway. This is the CD46 inhibitor development timeline. The identification of the CDKs and cyclins was in the year 1980s. And at the early 2010s, the development of the selective CD46 inhibitors was presented. So palbociclib is the first in-class cyclin-dependent kinase for 6 inhibitors that were evaluated and approved for the treatment of patients with metastatic hormone-sensitive breast cancer. FDA granted palbociclib accelerated approval in the year 2015 in combination with letrozole in patients with metastatic hormone receptor positive breast cancer in combination with letrozole. While in the year 2016, FDA granted approval in combination with fulvestrant for the treatment of hormone receptor positive HER2 negative advanced or metastatic breast cancer in women with disease progression following endocrine therapy. Accordingly, this was based on many randomized trials. We have the data of the Paloma 1 trial. It was a phase 2 multi-center open-label randomized study, including 2 cohorts of patients. The first cohort are those with hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, advanced breast cancer. And the second cohort were those with ER positive, hormone receptor, HER2 negative, advanced breast cancer with cyclin B1 amplification and or loss of P16. And the primary endpoint of this trial was progression-free survival, while the secondary endpoints were response rate and median overall survival. And in this trial, there was a definitive improvement in terms of progression-free survival in favor of the experimental arm of the combination of palbo plus aromatase inhibitor with 51% improvement. This was in the intent to treat population. Same improvement in the first cohort or cohort 1 with a 17% improvement in favor of the combination, and also same thing in the cohort 2 with about 49% improvement in favor of the combination of palbociclib plus letrozole. Progression-free survival was in favor of the experimental arm in all subgroups, irrespective to the previous anti-hormonal therapy, previous systemic therapy, and disease-free interval. In terms of response rate was in favor of the combination of the palbo plus aromatase inhibitor. It was 36% versus 27%. In terms of median overall survival, there was a numerical improvement in favor of the experimental arm, but this improvement was not statistically significant. In terms of adverse events, as you all know, neutropenia was much higher in the combination arm, but this was not associated with serious complications. So the absence of serious complications resulting from palbo-associated neutropenia probably reflects a cytostatic rather than cytotoxic effect of the drug on the bone marrow. We also have the data of the Paloma 2 trial, and again, it's same design, same everything. Patients with postmenopausal women with ER positive, HER2 negative, advanced breast cancer were randomized into 2-to-1 fashion to receive either palbo plus letrozole or placebo plus letrozole. And the primary endpoint of this trial was progression-free survival, while the secondary endpoints were response rate and overall survival. And again, in this trial, there was a definitive improvement in terms of progression-free survival in favor of the combination of the palbo plus letrozole with a 35% improvement. Also, progression-free survival was in favor of the combination in all subgroup of patients. Objective response rate of clinical benefit response and the median duration of response were all in favor of the experimental arm, the combination of palbo plus letrozole. Again, regarding the adverse events, neutropenia was higher in the experimental arm when compared to the placebo, but was not associated with any complication. No other serious adverse events were encountered in both arms. Also, in the palbo letrozole group, there was a lower incidence of headache, hot flashes, and pulmonary embolism. So in Paloma 2 trial, efficacy was substantially improved with the addition of palbo, and the longer median progression-free survival with palbo letrozole in the Paloma 2 was consistent with that observed in the Paloma 1. Here is the final analysis of the Paloma 2 trial, what had been published in the ASCO meeting 2022. And in this analysis, we'll find here that 10% of the patients in the experimental arm is still on treatment in comparison to only 2% in the control arm. The other important issue regarding the missing survival data in this trial, the missing survival data in the experimental arm was about 13% in comparison to 21% in the control arm. So there was a disproportion in terms of the missing survival data between the two arms. And this might explain the difference or the effect of this on the median survival. So if we look here, the subgroup analysis, we'll find that those with performance status 0 subgroup has a maximum disproportionate missing data between the two arms. 11% in the experimental arm versus 28% in the control arm. And this was reflected on the median overall survival. Same thing in terms of disease-free interval. There was a disproportion between the two arms in patients with disease-free interval less than 12 months. It was 12% missing survival data in the experimental arm versus 29% in the control arm. On the contrary, if the two arms were well balanced in terms of the missing survival data, we find here a survival benefit in favor of the combination of palbo plus letrozole. Same thing for the group of patients with disease-free interval more than 12 months. When the two arms were well balanced for the missing survival data, there was a definite improvement in the median overall survival in favor of the combination of palbo plus letrozole. Also, by excluding patients with survival data not available, there was further improvement in terms of median overall survival in favor of the combination of palbo plus letrozole. Combining the two data together, the Paloma 1 and the Paloma 2, again, there was a further improvement in terms of median overall survival. 51.8 months versus 46.8. Also, if you find the data of the patients with disease-free interval more than 12 months, there was a dramatic improvement in terms of the median overall survival in favor of the combination of palbo plus letrozole, and this difference was statistically significant with a hazard ratio of 0.72. What about the effect of palbociclib in endocrine-resistant patients? Regarding progression-free survival, there was an improvement in favor of the combination when compared to letrozole, irrespective to the disease-free survival interval, whether it was less than or more than 12 months. While this was not the case for the median overall survival, the benefit was only in the group of patients with disease-free survival more than 12 months, and this was not the case for the group of patients with the disease-free survival less than 12 months. Again, this is a reflection of the mismatch or the imbalance between the two arms, the combination of palbo plus letrozole, where the missing data was 12%, and for the control arm, where the missing data was 29%. Again, while there is overall survival difference between the studies, this could be related to the number of patients with disease-free survival less than 12 months. It was much higher in the Paloma 2 trial. It was about 22% in comparison to 1%, 7%, and 0% in Mona Lisa 2, 7, and 3 respectively. Also, if we look at the data of the patients with the subgroup of patients with disease-free survival of more than 12 months, there was a dramatic improvement in terms of the median overall survival in favor of the combination of palbo plus letrozole when compared to the control arm. 64 months versus 44 months with a hazard ratio of 0.736. So PALOMA-2 met its primary endpoint of improving progression-free survival and other secondary endpoints. Overall survival was numerically longer in the palbo letrozole arm versus best supportive care plus letrozole, but the results was not statistically significant. The interpretation of overall survival in the PALOMA-2 is limited by a large and disproportionate percentage of patients with missing survival data between the treatment arms. This is an interesting article comparing the three drugs together in indirect treatment comparison. And in this comparison, there was no difference in terms of progression-free survival or overall survival between the three drugs, the abemaciclib, palbociclib, ribociclib. Also, the progression-free survival and overall survival hazard ratio and p-value was not significant when the three drugs were compared together. So this finding from this indirect treatment comparison suggested no significant progression-free survival or overall survival difference between the CD46 inhibitors in postmenopausal patients with hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, and metastatic breast cancer. So the selection might be based on the adverse event and as well as the cost issue. Another important thing, especially on those days, we have to support our local and national pharmaceutical industry. Regarding the PALOMA-3 trial, it was a randomized phase 3 trial, including patients pre or peri or postmenopausal with ER positive, HER2 negative, advanced breast cancer. And this group of patients were randomized into 2-to-1 fashion to receive either palbo plus fulvestrant or placebo plus fulvestrant in patients who progressed on endocrine therapy. And again, the primary endpoint of this trial was progression-free survival, while the secondary endpoints were response rate and median overall survival. And in this trial, again, there was a definitive improvement in terms of progression-free survival in favor of the combination of palbo plus fulvestrant when compared to fulvestrant, with a 73% improvement. And progression-free survival was in favor of this combination in all subgroups. Also, objective response rate was in favor of the combination of palbo plus fulvestrant when compared to placebo plus fulvestrant, 10.4 versus 6.3%. Again, rate of clinical benefit was in favor of the combination of fulvestrant plus palbo when compared to fulvestrant, 34% versus 19% rate of clinical benefit. Adverse event, again, neutropenia was higher in the combination when compared to fulvestrant, but other non-hematological toxicities was more or less the same in the two arms. Also, in this trial, in the palbo fulvestrant group, there was a lower incidence of febrile neutropenia, serious adverse events. Regarding quality of life, global quality of life was generally maintained with palbo fulvestrant, but deteriorated significantly with placebo fulvestrant. Also, patients receiving palbo showed a significant improvement from the baseline in emotional functioning as compared with patients receiving placebo. So adding placebo to fulvestrant resulted in substantially longer progression-free survival than fulvestrant alone in patients with advanced hormone receptor positive HER2-negative breast cancer. These are the data of the extended follow-up in the PALOMA-3 trial. The aim was to confirm the earlier finding of PALOMA-3 with extended follow-up and show the results of subgroup and market analysis. And in this extension of the trial, again, there was a definitive improvement in favor of the combination when compared to the fulvestrant only, with a 54% improvement. Subgroup analysis or progression-free survival was in favor of the combination on all subgroups. Also, progression-free survival in relation to the PI3K, there was a numerical improvement in PFS for patients with PI3K negative when compared to those with PI3K positive, 9.2 months for the negative PI3K compared to 5.8 months for the PI3K mutation. Also, this combination, the progression-free survival was in favor of this combination, irrespective to the PI3K status, whether it's negative with 55% improvement or mutant with a 52% improvement. So in PALOMA-3, the combination of fulvestrant plus palbociclib was associated with significant improvement in objective response with clinical benefit and progression-free survival. What about real-world evidence? The P-Reality X is one of the major real-world trials addressing the role of adding palbociclib to aromatase inhibitors, and in this trial including more than 2,800 patients, and it looked at the median overall survival and the progression-free survival when palbociclib was added to aromatase inhibitor. And in this trial, there was an improvement in terms of median overall survival in favor of the combination of palbo plus aromatase inhibitor when compared to aromatase inhibitor only, with a 33% improvement. Also, there was an improvement in terms of progression-free survival in favor of the combination with a 30% improvement. And the improvement was in all subgroup of patients. Also, if we look at the subsequent second-line treatment in this group of patients, we find that the majority did receive CD4/6 inhibitor upon progression as a second-line treatment. So, to date, the P-Reality X is the first real-world comparative analysis representing a large and geographically diverse database to report a median overall survival with palbociclib combination therapy for first-line use in hormone receptor positive HER2-negative metastatic breast cancer. This is another interesting trial published last month. It's a real-world tumor response of palbociclib in combination with aromatase inhibitor as a first-line therapy in pre- and perimenopausal women with metastatic breast cancer. And in this real-world tumor response, in this trial, real-world tumor response was determined based on treating clinicians' assessment of radiological evidence for change in disease burden. And in this trial, there was a trend towards improved response rate in favor of the combination in this group of patients with who are premenopausal or perimenopausal, in all patients and also in patients with more than or equal to one tumor assessment. So these results suggest that pre- and perimenopausal women with hormone receptor positive HER2-negative metastatic breast cancer appear more likely to respond to first-line palbociclib plus aromatase inhibitor than aromatase inhibitor alone. and supplement existing data suggesting a therapeutic benefit of the combination of palbo plus aromatase inhibitor in this population. What about guidelines? All guidelines suggested or showed that the combination of palbo plus aromatase inhibitor is the standard of care for patients with metastatic hormone receptor positive breast cancer, and palbociclib plus fulvestrant should be considered as the standard of care as a second line upon progression for patients with metastatic hormone sensitive breast cancer, according to the ASCO guidelines, the ESMO guidelines, and the NCCN guidelines. So palbociclib is the first CD46 inhibitor to be approved for the use in hormone receptor positive, HER2-negative advanced breast cancer, approved for use with an aromatase inhibitor as first-line treatment of hormone receptor positive, HER2-negative advanced breast cancer in postmenopausal women based on phase 2 study Paloma 1 and phase 3 study Paloma 2. Also approved for the use with fulvestrant as a second line or later line treatment of hormone receptor positive, HER2-negative advanced breast cancer based on the phase 3 study of Paloma 3. And palbociclib had the most robust body of published real-world evidence, and several studies of palbociclib reported results at a longer follow-up times than study of other CD46 inhibitors. Results from these studies were complementary to clinical trial data and demonstrated effectiveness and safety of palbociclib therapy over time. And here I wish to thank you for listening, and I'm ready for any questions.
Professor, for this nice presentation. Any comments from audience? You? ما تجيش منك.
Dr. Tariq, as usual, very comprehensive presentation, real world data related to CDK inhibitor. My question related to, in ESMO just days ago, presented trial to choice with Egyptian participation, very strong Egyptian participation, and address that we can use it in a very critical situation, like a very critical situation, impending crisis or visceral crisis. Is there ongoing data on palbo with the same situation? In visceral crisis, impending crisis?
The comparison will see that there is no difference in terms of the efficacy. But now, as I've mentioned, we have to select according to the adverse event, and now according to the first species. And the other thing I want to highlight here is we have to support our research and national investment.
Thank you. Any comment?
Very, very good presentation as expected. The question of Dr. Lobna is, can we use CDK4/6 inhibitors as first-line treatment in the management of patients with impending visceral crisis or visceral crisis? And we had only data from the Right Choice study, which included many patients from several institutions in Egypt. And as you know, the outcome was in favor of ribociclib plus endocrine therapy versus combination chemotherapy. And we presented during the last ESMO data on patients with visceral crisis versus patients with impending or aggressive breast cancer, but not in visceral crisis. And we showed that in patients with the definition, ABC definition of visceral crisis, ribo plus endocrine therapy was equivalent to combination chemotherapy. in terms of progression-free survival and in terms of overall response rate and time to response. So you can use it if you wish in patients with visceral crisis. You don't worry about response rate. You don't worry about time to response. The progression-free survival is as good as chemotherapy combination, not monotherapy. For patients with the dominant visceral disease, but not within the definition of visceral crisis, ribociclib was better than chemotherapy in progression-free survival and in time to treatment failure, but the same overall response rate. At the present time, we have two studies, one phase 2 study and another phase 3 study with abemaciclib in the same definition that we put in the right choice. So they quoted our definition of impending visceral crisis because it's a bit of new term. In China, they have their own CDK4/6 inhibitor. They are undergoing a study, phase 2, single arm, not randomized. The other two arms with the two studies with abemaciclib using abema plus endocrine therapy versus chemotherapy. While the Chinese it's a single arm phase 2 study using their CDK4/6 inhibitor with fulvestrant as first or second or third line, but they excluded patients with primary resistance. In our study, we included patients with primary resistance, in which there was no superiority, of course, of ribo arm over chemotherapy. Okay.
So, Dr. Hamid, this data is just for abemaciclib. Would you?
Abemaciclib, we don't have data. We have ongoing study.
I mean the ongoing study.
And the Chinese, it is still ongoing. The only study that presented its data in the last San Antonio and in the ESMO this month was the right choice study.
Okay. Any more questions? Thank you so much.